few headlines just to set the scene. Biden says ICC war crimes arrest warrant outrageous. You don't need to read further to be confident he's referring to the ones issued for Benjamin Netanyahu and his sacked defense minister Yoav Gallant, rather than the Hamas commander Mohammed Deif, who is believed to already be dead. Corrupt, in quotes, war crime charges are anti-Semitic hate, says Netanyahu. What is he worried about? Israeli leader faces arrest if he flies into Britain, on the front of the Times. Netanyahu faces arrest if he flies into Britain, in another article within the paper. ICC arrest warrant for Netanyahu over Gaza, and so it continues. This isn't an immediately obvious parallel to draw, but you know the Daily Telegraph journalist who claimed that she was being investigated by police for a non-crime hate incident, and then the police published the transcript of the interview, of the visit to her house, and it turned out she was being interviewed about a potential hate crime incident. She doesn't immediately have a lot in common with Benjamin Netanyahu, but I found myself thinking in both cases, shouldn't we let the legal process take its course before we jump to extremely strong and pungent conclusions? Shouldn't we just wait and see what happens? And in the first instance, the police have revealed that they will not be pursuing a prosecution. The case has been dropped after a very cursory visit to her home. Whether or not the police have buckled under the weight of hysterical media coverage, which completely ignored the misrepresentation or the misunderstanding of the facts, I do not know. But I always find myself, I don't know when did this become a naive position to adopt? You know, unless you're in a country where an adjudicated rapist president is trying to put an alleged sex offender in the Attorney General's office, unless you are living in the upside down, you wait for due process to take its course. You have faith in the rules-based order. You have to, because it's all that guards us against chaos. It's all that guards us against tyranny. Vladimir Putin has an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court in place, which essentially confines him to the boundaries of Russia, with a couple of exceptions. He'd be welcome, I'm sure, in North Korea, if he hasn't been already. But it's what the rules-based international order does. And then you investigate, you interrogate the allegation, and you find out whether or not it's true. 140 countries are signatories to the International Criminal Court. And although the predictability with which Benjamin Netanyahu cites anti-Semitism against this allegation that him and his former defense minister have effectively starved people in Gaza by preventing aid from making its way in, something that has been talked about now for years, you begin to wonder quite how you've ended up in this situation, or how we've ended up in this situation. Not just the warrants being issued, but also the entirely predictable response from people who have allowed Benjamin Netanyahu to achieve impunity. This is what those of us who worry that he is worse for Israel than for almost any other element of this whole sorry saga. That's what those of us have tried to explain, that unswerving support for him is probably not in the best interest of Israel, have been worried about from the very start. Because you afford impunity to somebody who is so obviously unfit, whether or not the corruption charges against him, which he has sought to avoid. I don't suppose he can accuse Israeli courts of being anti-Semitic, can he? But they're quite desperate to put him in the dock as well. An important point that is missed by almost every frothing right-wing commentator pretending or professing to be offended by this move today. I'll say that again. Israeli courts are desperate to get Benjamin Netanyahu into a dock as well. So I don't imagine he'll be able to accuse them of anti-Semitism, but frankly, I wouldn't put it past him. However, he's comfortable firing off a personal attack on the prosecutor as the adjudicated rapist soon to arrive in the White House, who has failed to get the alleged sex offender into the Attorney General's office because new allegations have emerged and Matt Gaetz has withdrawn from the field. His team, his allies, are calling for the court to be sanctioned, something that actually, and you may not know this, I didn't, has a precedent. So the problem with, goodness me, why wouldn't you want the legal process to be, why wouldn't you want justice to be seen to be done? This is the best opportunity for defenders of Netanyahu to prove that he's done nothing wrong. And of course, if your bias is so complete that you can't contemplate even the vaguest possibility that he's done something wrong, then you have to accuse the institutions of being unfit for purpose and being biased. It is pure Donald Trump, and yet it's been undertaken by people who frankly should know better. Nobody has demonstrated ignorance, though, so far on the scale of the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, who posted on social media a contribution so pant-wettingly ignorant, not to mention dangerous, that I presumed that it was fake. And when I tried to find it, I couldn't. So I doubly presumed that it was fake, but it wasn't fake. It has since been deleted, and I'll share that with you shortly because it's an almost perfect distillation of how bonkers, for want of a better word, some of the defences of Benjamin Netanyahu will become. Let's do a couple from my inbox just to show you what we're talking about. Mimi's been in touch. She says, I think you were born anti-Semite and anti-Israel. Shame on you. To which my question would be, how do you feel about the Israeli courts wanting to put Benjamin Netanyahu in the dock for a whole bunch of different alleged crimes? Are they anti-Israel? The Israeli lawyers and judges, are they anti-Semitic? I'm going to get pedantic and technical. Of course, the Hamas commander, who's also had a warrant issued, is technically a Semite. So is it anti-Semitic to issue an arrest warrant seeking his cooperation with investigations as well? It's incredible. And here's another one from Stephen. Why have you already hung, drawn and quartered Netanyahu? So this is what I mean by people who actually can't see how bent they've become. Because I say, who wouldn't want to see the legal process properly followed? Who wouldn't want to see, if you think there's a chance that he's innocent? And of course there's a chance that he's innocent. We are all innocent until proven guilty. Why would you not want the legal process to be followed? Let's follow the legal process. Stephen gets in touch to say, why have you already hung, drawn and quartered Netanyahu? So when you say, I think that someone should face trial because these allegations are very serious, people who have been boiled over the course of the last year into a position where they can't contemplate the possibility of wrongdoing, respond by accusing you of exactly what they are doing themselves. Let's wait for the due process of law to be applied. How dare you condemn him? No, hang on. I'm saying let's wait. You're saying he's innocent. So you're the one who wants to do away with due process. You're the one who wants to do away with the legal system. Without the international rules-based order, we are at the mercy of people like Putin. Without the international rules-based order, we have no... I hesitate to use the word civilization because that condemns everybody who lives in countries that are like Iran and Russia, that are totalitarian regimes. And I don't want to do that. But in the context of the world, if there is not a rule book by which we all abide, or by which all democracies are required to abide, if that rule book doesn't exist, or if that rule book gets torn up, what are we left with? What are we left with? I mean, it is unthinkable what the alternative would be. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, contributes to the conversation in this way, which is a very helpful, and it's not a word I often use about Honest Bob, but it's a very helpful illustration of how desperate these defences already are. He writes, the ICC has no credibility as it turns a blind eye to the crimes of tyrants like Khomeini and Putin. There are two problems with that sentence. Can you spot what they are? Or shall I tell you? Okay, Khomeini's dead, and there is a warrant out for Putin. But the Shadow Secretary of State for Justice is so immersed in culture wars and ignorance and idiocy and performative provocation that he either doesn't understand that or couldn't be bothered to find out, or elected to pretend that he didn't know it because he thought he'd get more clicks and giggles by telling that lie. The fact that he's deleted it suggests it wasn't the final option. Equating Israel's war of self-defense with Hamas's terrorism is absurd. Well, yeah, but no one's done that. Netanyahu and Gallant stand accused of starving the civilian population in Gaza. The Hamas commander stands accused of engaging in or helping to organise the terrorist massacre of October the 7th. Where's the conflation there? Starving people is a war crime. If it is proven to be true, a war crime has been committed. The UK shouldn't enforce this farcical arrest warrant from a politicised court that is mired in scandal. So a bloke who doesn't know that Khomeini's dead and Putin has an arrest warrant out on him, is now giving lectures on what the ICC should be doing. And then he uses, perhaps inevitably, for these deeply, deeply disingenuous and dishonest politicians, he uses the phrase kangaroo court. The latest decision will only fuel the growing perception that the ICC is a kangaroo court. How many times have I said to you how dangerous it is for you and I to sit in judgment on a case when we haven't sat in the court for every piece of evidence and every testimony? It's the politics of a Farage to claim that you know more than the CPS does about a case because you've been following Andrew Tate on Twitter, to claim that you understand better what has gone on in a courtroom because you want to write a front page article for tomorrow's Sun newspaper claiming that judges have all gone soft or that prison is a holiday camp. The idea that you have something as august and as internationally important as the ICC delivering a warrant for arrest of a man whose own country want to put him on trial for various other alleged crimes is dismissed without examination is proof of just how disastrous this entire debate has been in Britain. Because the conversation in other countries is going to be different. In the Netherlands, they've already said Benjamin Netanyahu hops off a plane in Amsterdam, he's under arrest. The British government is prevaricating, I think hedging its bets a bit, in the full knowledge that the likelihood of Benjamin Netanyahu hopping off a plane anytime soon in this country is very slim. But imagine an emergency diversion. He'll be welcome in Trump's America, international arrest warrant notwithstanding. But to be honest, to be in Trump's government or to be a friend of Trump's, the more criminal allegations you have against you, the more likely you are to actually be in favour with Donald Trump. But so imagine if some sort of emergency diversion unfolds as Netanyahu's flying to America to worship at the altar of Donald Trump, and he gets diverted to Heathrow. Keir Starmer would have one heck of a big decision to make, but as a former DPP and human rights lawyer, I suspect there's only one way in which he could jump. So, I mean, part of me wants to ask, how did this happen? But the answer, of course, is that we don't know. And I'd be asking, how did this happen? As in, how can people like Honest Bob Jenrick and the Daily Telegraph be queuing up to condemn the court? You remember when Owen Paterson, again, I've now brought the Daily Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson and the Conservative former politician Owen Paterson into a conversation about Benjamin Netanyahu. Why? Because due process is all that we have got. It's all that we have got. It's why extremist politicians hate it. It's all that we have got. It's all that guards us against tyranny, either in our own country or elsewhere. So when Owen Paterson was found to have broken the rules in the House of Commons, what did Boris Johnson, various Daily Telegraph journalists and Jacob Rees-Mogg try to do? They tried to rip up the rule book. They tried to condemn the actual parliamentary standards rather than condemning the parliamentarian who had been found by a jury of his peers to have broken them. So if you are a friend of Israel, and I hope you are, like me, a friend of Israel, then the possibility that the country is being governed by a war criminal is one that you would want to see interrogated immediately and robustly. If you are a friend of Israel, I would have thought that seeing the man in charge of your country on trial for very serious allegations and apparently well-evidenced ones would be a bit of a priority for you. But what the war has done, and what Hamas handed him on a silver platter on October the 7th, was the mother of all avoidances. Keep the war going for as long as possible in order to avoid being put in a dock in Israel, which is heartbreaking news for Palestinians in Gaza and in Lebanon, because, you know, if the possibility of being put in a dock in The Hague is now on the table, I don't think that is likely to see any softening of approach to killing civilians in either of those territories. It's extraordinary that this is debatable. At least that's how it seems to me. I'm not ill-informed, I'm not uninformed, but I'm not completely informed. It's possible there's stuff that I've missed, but I would have thought that if your man, for want of a better phrase, stands accused of war crimes, then you demand your day in court. You demand your day in court. Unless you feel that you have so successfully influenced the discourse in the countries that you care about, that actually you're going to be trusting your position to the court of public opinion, which has been very effectively dictated or directed by precisely the sort of politicians like Honest Bob Jenrick and various Daily Telegraph columnists that we've already alluded to today. Why would you not want Benjamin Netanyahu to be given a chance to prove his innocence 0345 6060 973. You get accused of something, what do you want? You want the chance to prove your innocence, right? And where do you do that? 0345 6060 973. There it is. And one more thing, if I may. I knew that something like this was going to happen because as soon as people, decent people, ringing me to support actions in Gaza, as soon as we got to that question of how many people would you be comfortable to see dead, and they would say, oh, I don't want to see any dead. And I would say, no, but we have to put a number on it. How much will be too much? It's a simultaneously crass and coruscating question at the same time. How many would be too much? And when you realized that even people living here with family and emotional links to Israel, even people living here were perilously close. And eventually, of course, they crossed the line, but perilously close to saying, I don't think there's an upper limit on how many people he can kill in pursuit of freeing the hostages, who we know now have never really been his top priority, or in pursuit of eradicating Hamas, which we have known all along was an impossible goal, and quite possibly the opposite has been achieved for future generations. So as soon as I heard you tell me that you couldn't really, or you weren't prepared, or you got very angry with me for just pointing out that there has to be a point at which we could say this has gone too far, this is too much, came out on October the 8th in full support of Israel, like most of the world, and their right to defend themselves and their right to respond, their right to retaliate. But within weeks, it was becoming pretty clear that the response was going to dwarf the provocation. The response was going to dwarf the atrocity. The atrociousness of the response was going to dwarf the atrocity of October the 7th. And at precisely that point, I told you that this is such a dangerous road to go down. Because if you give impunity to anybody, they will use it. And that's why the International Criminal Court finds itself in the unhappy position of having to issue a warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel. And I don't understand why anybody wouldn't welcome the opportunity he has been given to prove that he's not guilty of any of the things many people believe him to be, up to and including war crimes and genocide.